Hello and welcome. Thank you for being here and investing your time in improving your English and yourself. Have you ever heard people say you only need 200 sentences to speak English, and you saved it, believed it, but in the end, you still couldn't say a proper sentence? You started with a lot of hope. You thought this time would be different. Every day you opened the video, listened to each sentence, and repeated after it, and it felt like you were improving. But then, a few days later, you faced a real situation. Someone asked you a very simple question, and you just froze. Not because you had never learned that sentence, but because you couldn't remember it when you needed it. Everything you had listened to, everything you had repeated suddenly disappeared at the exact moment you needed it most. You started to doubt, not the method, but yourself. Maybe you thought 200 sentences are not enough. Maybe you thought you need more than that. But there is one truth that very few people tell you. The problem was never the number 200. It is how you turn those 200 sentences into your own reflex. You don't lack knowledge, you lack reflex. You have learned a lot of vocabulary, but each word stays separate like pieces that never come together. You learned go, eat, want, need, but when you need to make a full sentence, you stay silent because your brain was not trained to speak in sentences. It was only trained to remember single words. You remember meanings, but not how to use them. You understand when you read, but you cannot bring it out when you speak. So every time you open your mouth, you translate from Vietnamese to English in your head. That process is slow, tiring, and almost impossible to keep up with a real conversation. Someone says a simple sentence you need 5 seconds to understand and another 5 seconds to think of a reply. By the time you are ready to speak, the conversation has already moved on. It's not that you are slow, you are just using the wrong system. Your brain does not communicate with single words, it communicates with complete chunks. When you speak Vietnamese, you don't think word by word. You don't think I, want, go, eat. You think a full idea. English works the same way. If you keep learning words separately, you are forcing your brain to do something it was not designed to do. That is why you study for a long time but still cannot speak. On the other hand, when you learn full sentences, things start to change. For example, instead of learning hungry equals doi, you learn I'm so hungry right now. Instead of learning late equals tray, you learn sorry, I'm a bit late. These sentences become your reflex. You don't need to translate, you just say them. At first, it may be slow, but after repeating many times, it becomes natural, just like how you learned your first language when you were a child. No one taught you word by word, you learned in full sentences. You don't need 2,000 words, you need 200 sentences that you can use immediately. Short, simple sentences that appear again and again in daily life. Sentences you can use when ordering drinks, asking for directions, making small talk, or reacting quickly in unexpected situations. For example, can you help me? What do you mean? Give me a second. That makes sense. These sentences are not difficult, but they are very powerful because they help you keep the conversation going. You don't need to speak in a complex way, you just need to not stop. When you have enough of these sentences in your mind, you start to survive in communication. And when you can survive, you start to feel more confident. From there, you have space to improve. 200 sentences are not the final goal, but they are a very important starting point. You think you need to learn more, but actually you need to repeat enough. A sentence you hear once will disappear after a few hours. A sentence you hear and repeat 10 times will start to feel familiar. A sentence you use 20 times in real situations will become yours. That is how reflex is built, not by understanding, but by repetition. Listen, repeat, speak, and use again. You may feel bored when you hear the same sentence again and again, but that repetition is programming your brain. Just like going to the gym, you don't build muscle by lifting once. You need to repeat regularly and in the right way. English is the same. You are used to learning for tests, but communication is not a test. No one gives you a score. People only care if they understand you or not. So your way of learning must change. Instead of asking, "What does this word mean?" ask, "When do I use this sentence?" Instead of trying to remember definitions, imagine a real situation. You are at a coffee shop. What will you say? You are late. How will you apologize? You don't understand. How will you ask again? When you learn with situations, you don't just remember, you know how to use it, and that is what really matters. There will be a day when you open your mouth and the sentence comes out faster than you think. No more translating in your head, no more freezing, just a natural reflex. Maybe it is just a simple sentence like "I got it" or "That's fine," but the feeling at that moment is very different. You realize you can actually speak, not perfect, but enough to communicate. And from that moment, you start to believe in yourself again, not because you learned more, but because you learned the right way. You don't need to be smarter, you just need the right direction. English is not a subject, it is a reflex skill. And reflex doesn't come from understanding more, it comes from repeating the right things. 200 sentences will not make you fluent immediately, but they help you start speaking. And when you can speak, everything else starts to make sense. So don't ask how many words you should learn. Ask yourself how many sentences you have repeated today. Because sometimes what changes everything is not new knowledge, it's what you are brave enough to say out loud. If you find this video interesting and helpful, please give me a like and subscribe.